Hello everyone. Today we're looking at Yosemite National Park, and this is a picture of the three brothers. We are exercising a couple of things today. One of them is working with interesting shapes, and in looking at this image we're struck by the mountain in the back, the three brothers, as well as the shapes created by the pine forest along the shore, and of course the reflections as well. They create an interesting array of shapes that we'll explore today. And in addition to the shapes that we're going to think about as we're drawing our image, we're going to look at the technique of working dry into wet. If you looked at the previous video, you had some experience with working with a relatively dry brush and creating an image working into the wet paper. So the first thing we're going to do is set out to do a drawing of this, and one of the choices we can make are whether to divide the painting straight down the middle with that shoreline or put it a little higher or a little lower. In this painting I'm going to put it a little lower so that the reflection is not as long and we focus more on the height of the mountains above. I'm starting with a cobalt blue and going to create a graded wash. We have experience with this already from the previous week. It's going to move from this cobalt hue to a warmer hue at the bottom with yellow ochre and a bit of cad red. We're painting the sky, and I'm going to be painting uphill now into the mountain area with this same yellow ochre, creating a soft transition, but a definite transition from that pale blue to a warmer hue. In addition, I'm working in some red here while the paint is wet, just to give a little more strength to the mountain that's behind before I move down. All this being done wet into wet. So my board is at a slight angle, and you can tell the color's flowing straight down. From here I go, oh, look at that interesting shape before we move on. It's an interesting shape on the paper regardless of what it is. Now I'm moving down into the water with just a little bit of water and dropping a few of the same hues to create a similar hue color into the water, and using cad red light and a bit of yellow ochre. And then we'll let this dry a little bit before we move on so that we have a nice dry surface. And then we'll start to apply a shadow color to the mountains while it's dry. We can tell it's dry because the hard edges that are being formed up above. I'm using a little bit of cobalt blue and a little bit of that cad red, create a violet color. And while the paint is wet, I'm adding some strength to that to get a little bit more intensity into the mountains. And I bring this down pretty close to the shore, and then I'll start to work some of the trees into the lower section. But I stay up here until I'm relatively happy with it, and then I'll move forward. For the green, I'm going to be using a mixture of neutral tint and cad yellow light. It's a nice deep green, appropriate for these western pine. And this brushwork that I'm applying to the left side here, this represents those vertical trees that are kind of framing the image. They're closer to us, they're quite tall, but I'm working into the mountain area where it's still a little wet, so you notice that the edges are dissolving as I'm coming down. I use this as an opportunity to shape the grass or the small bushes that are on the shoreline. And I continue this way to build up the shape. I'm thinking of it almost as one complete shape, this pine forest from left to right. Adding the deep green while the paint is still a little wet, and getting a strong impression of the pine forest as it moves left to right. As a joint shape, it had an interesting appearance, seeming to bounce along from one tall tree to the other, smaller trees in between. So that's what I'm concentrating on, is establishing that sort of rhythmical bounce by repeating these tall shapes of the pine trees. The second color that I'm introducing now is giving a more three-dimensional uh, appearance to the trees. It's maybe painting the shadows so that we feel some depth in the forest, also some variety in the green. Using a smaller brush and thicker paint, this is definitely working dry into wet. More and more the trees are pulling forward because of the thickness of the paint that I'm using, even though it was introduced in a wet area. Because it had some body to it, as it dries, it's coming forward. And I'll continue with the trees, moving from left to right, building up that large forest. Here on the right side, there's an outcropping that moves onto the water. Another green area, green bush that has some grass on the shore, but this has a branch, a large branch, a different type of tree that is moving from the right side of the picture in towards the left. So it kind of stops this rolling movement from left to right and pushes back into the middle of the painting with a movement from right to left. You'll see as the branch starts to come in how it directs the attention back in towards those three large shapes of the three brothers. This is pretty true to the photograph in terms of composition, but it's definitely something that I noticed and was appreciative of, is that as a composition this really focuses on those three large shapes. The paint is still drying, and it's a good opportunity to add some defining darks before we move on to the reflections in the lower section of the painting.